I'll take it with me when I go back down there. You can introduce everybody. Okay? Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Diane McCutcheon. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources, and I'd like to welcome you to our first of our Inclusion Infusions live events, where we hope to spark your curiosity about others, challenge your thinking about inclusion and diversity, and inspire you to reflect on your values and your behaviors. Today's event is hosted in partnership with Student Support Services. Algonquin College would like to acknowledge that today's event is taking place on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people, traditionally known as the Anishinaabe. Algonquin people are the original inhabitants of the wide swath of territory along the Ottawa River. In Algonquin culture, it is appropriate for the guests to acknowledge their hospitality of their hosts when entering their territory. With this tradition in mind, we respectfully thank the Algonquin people for hosting us on their ancestral lands. Miigwech, thank you. Individual religious beliefs can be an important part of a person's identity. We should all be able to have discussions that foster knowledge, sharing, respect, understanding, and belonging. We will have this conversation today together. This way? So, we will have this conversation together today with those values in mind. Learning is also one of our college values. Learning doesn't have to be limited to the classroom. We can learn a lot just from having conversations with one another, like what we're going to do today. Religion includes practices, beliefs, and observances that are part of organized faith, but it doesn't include groups that promote violence or hate towards others. That violates criminal law. Under the Ontario Human Rights Code, discrimination because of religion or creed is against the law. At Algonquin College, we conduct ourselves with our core values at the center of all of what we do: caring, learning, integrity, and respect. And we believe that everyone should have access to the same opportunities and benefits and be treated with equal dignity and respect. Today, we are starting that conversation around religion and spirituality at work with a focus on three faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which represents millions of people from around the world. It is my pleasure to welcome Sarah Gaughan as a member of the HR team in the role of Inclusion and Diversity Specialist. Sarah will introduce our three experts and religious leaders and moderate today's panel. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Diane. So welcome, everybody. I have the privilege of introducing our speakers today and moderating. So let me start by introducing Rabbi Eitan Kenter. You were born and raised in Winchester, New York. As an undergraduate in the joint program with Jewish Theological Seminary and Columbia University, Rabbi Kenter majored in American Studies. In 2006, he graduated from the Davidson School of Jewish Education with honors in the Informal Communal Education program. Following his ordination in 2009, Rabbi Kenter joined Congregation B'nai Torah in Atlanta, Georgia, as the associate rabbi, eventually assuming the title of Rabbi and Chief Learning Officer. So welcome, we're glad to have you. We're going to move along now to our next panelist. Yuri Derkach is a chaplain here at Algonquin College, our own campus ministry. Yuri has been the head chaplain and counselor of campus ministry, ecumenical, interdenominational Christian ministry at Algonquin College for 8 years. So you've probably seen him on campus at this point. He's part of Ukrainian Orthodox, Greco-Catholic, and Protestant churches. He studied philosophy, religion, morality, and ethics at St. Basil College and Stanford University in the United States, as well as theology and pastoral counseling at St. Paul University and the University of Ottawa, and has graduated with a Master's of Theology in Conflict Studies. He is a coach, lecturer, mentor of young people, and guest speaker at different schools across North America and Europe. And additionally, beyond all those studies, he's also composer and founder of the forum Create to Inspire Souls for creative artists across the globe to share their creativity in art, music, poetry, and to connect to their creative selves and their creator. Welcome.
Thank you.
And finally, we are very pleased to have His Eminence Imam Dr. Mohammed Jabara, who serves as Chief Imam and Resident Scholar at the Cordova Spiritual Education Center. Imam Jabara is an avid promoter of social responsibility and universal values. Through the Cordova Center, he seeks to establish love, harmony, friendship, and understanding through interfaith and intercultural outreach, social responsibility, and education. In addition to his unique intellectual accomplishments, having authored 105 academic books and lectured at prestigious universities around the world, Dr. Jabara is a skilled artist, an outdoor enthusiast who enjoys skiing, skating, hiking, among others. He's cycled across Canada to support a huge list of charities here. Imam Jabara was one of 7 individuals chosen to represent Canada in 2011 in the Department of State's International Visitors Leadership Program. In 2017, he was awarded the Royal Wallenberg Citation for Moral Courage in the face of anti-Semitism. So, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today. So, I will just let our audience know how we're going to run this morning. So, we're going to start with a broad overview of the 3 faith practices, which is going to be a unique challenge because we know how diverse those are. Then we're going to move into some specific workplace topics, things that you probably wonder about and interact with every day. And lastly, we're going to move into talking about how to make our campus inclusive for everyone. So don't worry, there's going to be time for your questions, not just the ones that we've been able to bring forward. And I will ask that as you ask your questions, please remember to use the microphone so that our friends and colleagues in Perth and Pembroke can participate as well. And Perth and Pembroke, if you would like to send your questions along, you can email them to me and I will grab them and happily ask them to our panelists. You can reach me at gauens@algonquincollege.com. So please send along any questions you have along the way. All right, let's get started. So the first question's a big one. And maybe I'll ask Imam Jabara to start.
Should we start with our friend here since he came first?
Going in. Religious historical order.
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll go from most recent.
It's usually simple
oldest.
because whatever he says, I'll say, well, we say the same thing.
I was hoping that I would be able to say that with you.
Sure,
so.
I think that's a good idea. I don't mind. I can do that.
Okay, so we'll go from youngest to oldest in order of religion then. You've got 3 minutes to give us a basic overview of the tenets of your religion. So here's the caveat. We absolutely understand that there are many different denominations, faith practices, cultural interpretations of that. So recognizing that, I'm giving you 3 minutes to tell us about Islam in a nutshell.
All right, so my 3 minutes start now. Keep track of my time. I would say the Islamic faith looks at itself as a continuation of previous ideas that it builds upon. And the beginning of these ideas is what the Torah tells us. Should you tell us? I'll tell you guys. There are 2 important passages that are repeated in the Quran, which are the same ideas that Christ comes to teach his disciples. The Prophet Muhammad comes and reiterates as well. And they go like this. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך וכל לבבך וכל נפשך ובכל מאודך. They're translated as, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And then it's supplemented with a very important passage. It says, "Ve'ahavta li're'echa kamocha ani Adonai," that you shall love your fellow human being, or your fellow, as you love yourself. Because this is a decree of the creator of the universe. So Christ comes, and then they ask him, Master, Master, what commandment is first of all? And what does he say? He repeats the same commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, and you shall love your fellow as you love yourself. Prophet Muhammad comes, he says the exact same thing in Arabic. أَن تُحِبَّ لِأَخِيكَ مَا تُحِبُّهُ لِنَفْسِكَ. Very simple. That is the basis of what our faith is about, a continuation of the same elements, the same, in a nutshell, of what the faith is about. So the question is, what does the concept of love mean? So the word habba or hava that's used in Hebrew, the same thing that is repeated in Aramaic, is originally the concept of a fertile grain that you plant into the soil. So when we think of love, love in our Western understanding comes to us more from the abstract thinking of the Greeks. It's something you can't really touch, like what's love? Can you feel it? We can philosophize about what love is. Okay, good, I have 1 minute. But love in the Semitic tongues is a physical, real, tangible thing. And what it is the concept of planting a fertile seed in others. It's very simple. So when it says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might, what it's actually saying is you're going to plant the seed of what the Creator is in your heart, and then you're going to make that manifest in your relationship with others and in the world to make the world a better place at the end of the day. So when he says to love others as you love yourself, in the same way that you want to improve yourself, the same way you want to build up yourself, you should do the same for others. So when Christ says love your enemies, he doesn't really say, send them a Valentine card. What he's saying is you should have the same hope for those people who despise you and hate you, that they should become better people. That's what love really is. It's about helping another person bring out their dormant potential, the best of who they are, even if they can't see it. So that is the summary of our faith in a nutshell.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's some very universal truths in what you just shared. And now going backward in time a little bit further, we would land on Christianity. And Yuri, can you share with us in your allotted 3 minutes what you think the crux of Christianity is?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah, and it's good to be here today with everyone. And Christian faith is centered around Jesus Christ. And if you read Nicene Creed, it summarizes pretty much what are the main tenets of Christianity, what Christians around the world all agree on. And this is that we believe in God the Father, the creator of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible, of the whole universe, and believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, and the Holy Spirit. And at some point in history, Jesus, the Son of God, came into the world, was born of Mary, and walked among us, talked with us, and talked to us about what heaven is, talked to us about godly things, heavenly things, and we know that Jesus became human so that humans can become divine, can become like God one day. So after Jesus sacrificing himself, giving his life for the entire world, for all humans, after his death, he resurrected and ascended to heaven, and there's a belief that there will be his second coming, his return to earth. In the meantime, we have his church in the world, which is governed by the Holy Spirit, and we have many pastors, bishops, deacons serving the people, and Christian believers come together to pray, to communicate to God, to study the Word of God, to study the instructions of the apostles, to remember Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, and to build each other up, to support each other up, and to live in the grace of God, and live as if the kingdom of God is already here on earth. Because Jesus made it possible to live already while in our life, to live that grace of God and strive to be like saints, to be holy, which is, again, to be people of love, and to demonstrate that love to one another, to our families, to our close ones, and to people all around us. And our main book for Christians is Bible. So we do have Old Testament and New Testament, and this is something that all Christians are called to meditate daily and to get inspired by the Holy Spirit how to be better people and to live in this world but be as if not of this world, sort of remembering where we came from and where are we returning eventually. So that's a summary of Christian faith.
Thank you. Now let's move to more than 2,000 years ago, quite far back in time. And Rabbi, I invite you to tell us about the religion of Judaism.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here together with you, Yuri and Mohammed. It's great to be sharing this morning with all of you. There's a famous Jewish joke that there are 2 Jews and 3 opinions. That the idea of being able to say that this is what Judaism believes is particularly challenging to accomplish because Judaism is largely a non-dogmatic religion, that there's not a one way to believe, there's not a one way to practice that is universally asserted. In fact, that Judaism is a religion, but it's also a culture and it's also a nationality, and all those things are true. So someone can be Jewish because they live in Israel and feel Jewish because they live in Israel. Someone can be Jewish when they're eating lox and bagels and watching Seinfeld. And someone can be Jewish when they're observing the Sabbath. All those different ways are ways that Jews feel Jewish along the way. Louis Jacobs attempted to best express the tenets of what Judaism is about, and he's a prominent 20th century thinker from Great Britain. And he said, God, Torah, and Israel are the 3 pillars upon which Judaism resides. So there's God, there's a belief in the Almighty, there's a belief in God, and in that belief in God, as all human beings are made in the image of God, we see the godliness in all people. But even when we talk about a belief in God, there are more than 104 different names for God in the Jewish liturgy. And so some of those names for God contradict each other. Some of those names for God represent different values and different ideas. So there's a belief in God, but one can believe in a very immanent, personal, internal God. One can believe in an external God, and one can believe in a God that exists in different ways in all those places. So God is a foundational principle in Jewish life. And then the second piece is Torah, which is a commitment to Jewish study, and the foundational document, which is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, which serves as the foundation for Jewish life. And for those of you who have ever experienced Jewish life today, it does not look very much like what you would encounter in the 5 books. So if you come to my synagogue, we don't light a lot of goats on fire. There are a number of practices that are not what we're done there. But the idea is the values and the principles of the Torah continue to resonate for us today. We find modern meaning in ancient practices and ancient texts and find ways to make it meaningful today. So sacrifices got replaced with prayer. It was the work of our hands got replaced with the work of our hearts by the rabbis about 2,000 years ago. So Torah, Jewish study, engagement in that way is a foundation of Jewish life. And the final one is Israel, which is a love for the people and land of Israel, is the third kind of tenet of the 3-legged stool of what it means to be a Jewish person, which is that there are ways that Judaism is universalistic, as was expressed in the God section. There are ways that Judaism is particularistic in relation to the Israel section, in a way in which we share a sense of Jewish observance and Jewish peoplehood and Jewish engagement in Jewish holidays and in other Jewish practices we encounter along the way, as well as a relationship with the land and people of Israel in that regard as well. So while there is, again, far more than 3 minutes about Judaism, I think God, Torah, and Israel, this sense of universal in particular, this sense of belief, study, and peoplehood being 3 of the kind of primary tenets what Judaism is all about is a good way to start.
Wonderful, and I'm going to follow up on that one with an equally difficult question. You said, there's as many ways that Jews may practice the Sabbath as there is Jews. But within that impossible question, how do Jewish people typically mark the Sabbath?
Does anyone here long for the day where when you left work, you were done with work? Does anyone, I'm like vaguely old enough to remember a time in which I did not have a cell phone And I had to like yell at my parents for picking up the phone and cutting out the AOL when we were trying to use the internet as a child. And so for me, the idea of the Sabbath is a day that the objective is to be, not to have, where we have control over ourselves rather than other things having control over us, is at the center of what the Sabbath represents for me. You don't realize how addicted you are to technology and certain things until you realize that the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is roll over and reach for your phone on the nightstand. And having one day a week where you think to yourself, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe today I'm going to refrain from that. Maybe today I'm going to spend time with my friends and family and community rather than engage in those work is, I think, at the center of what the Sabbath is and what it represents today, which is refraining from the use of technology, other electronic devices, and things like that. Coming together with our community in prayer and in study is another component of that. The other piece that's really essential in relation to the Sabbath is that in Judaism, the thing that is most sacred is not any person or any place, but time. And when we really think about it, I think there's nothing more valuable to us than our time. That once we use our time for one thing, we can't use it for anything else. And when we think about what we wish we had more of, more often than not, the answer is time. And the Sabbath is an opportunity, Shabbat is an opportunity to realize the sanctity of that time. That I can observe the Sabbath with anybody and anywhere, but it has to be beginning on Friday night at sunset and continues Saturday night at sundown. So I've observed the Sabbath here in Ottawa. In November, I observed the Sabbath in Arusha, Tanzania. In December, I was back in Atlanta and doing it. It doesn't matter where you are, and the timing might adjust slightly. There's some interesting questions about what do you do when you're in northern Sweden and the sun does not go down. When does the Sabbath begin and when does it end, or is it just a couple weeks long? This idea of realizing the sanctity and importance of time and valuing that time that we're able to spend on that day, and hopefully allowing the message and feelings of the Sabbath to be able to permeate into the rest of our weeks and inspire us through the rest of the week. The last thing I'll say is, it's interesting, one of the distinctions between the Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible is that the Christian Bible ends creation after day 6, and the Jewish Bible ends creation after day 7. So it's 6 days of creation followed by the Sabbath, versus in the Jewish Bible, it is 7 days of creation. And that the need to assess, reflect is actually part of the creative process. And I think for many of us, that's something that I take into my work life. The idea that often we finish a program, we finish a project, and we already move on to the next one without taking the time to think and reflect, and how did that go, and what can I learn, and how can it resonate? And for me, the objective of the Sabbath is also that day of the week, to be able to look back on the week that was, to be able to reflect on the week that was, to be able to appreciate the week that was, so I'm able to go more meaningfully into the week to come.
Thank you. And Yuri, how would you compare or contrast practicing the Sabbath for Christians?
Yeah, it's a very similar idea, is to have one day in a week rest in God, as well as spend time with your family, spend time with your church community. For Christians, the new Sabbath is Sunday, the Lord's Day, even though some Christians do also celebrate Sabbath on Saturday. The idea is, again, after a long week of work and after so many projects and after many worldly things that we end up doing through the week, is to find time for your spirit and come to a church and spend time in prayer and stillness and silence, and to re-energize your spirit, to get filled by the grace of the Holy Spirit, so that when you go back to work on Monday, you are renewed again, and you are whole again, and you can, again, by being filled with love of God, it will continue to inspire you to do your best in your everyday life. And for that day, not only you spend it in the church, if you come to church on Sunday or on Saturday, after the Eucharist or Holy Mass or liturgy, depending which denomination you're in, you would spend the rest of the day again with your family, but not like hiding in your corners and everybody doing their own thing, but actually like being with your spouse, with your children, and having a conversation, cooking a meal together, and actually reading the Bible together, and asking how everyone is doing, and showing interest in your loved ones. So that's the idea of the Sabbath in the Christian tradition.
And Imam Jabara, what does it look like for the Muslim community to come together and enjoy the Sabbath?
It's a great question. So first of all, the Quran acknowledges the same Sabbath as the Sabbath of the Jews, though it doesn't reinstate it upon the Muslims. So it tells the Jews, لا تعدوا في السبت, so observe the Sabbath. It tells them continue to observe it, but then it does something strange. So for the followers of Islam, it says, okay, for the Jews, this is important for them, so they have to continue with that. That tradition has to be respected, but it is not necessary for us. So what it says is that the Quran replaces the concept of the Sabbath as one day a week with the concept of the Salah, which is usually translated as a ritual prayer, which is 5 times a day. So it says, إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. That the concept of the salah, which literally in Arabic, salah means to connect two things that are disconnected. It's historically referred to these rope bridges that were built to connect ravines in the deserts or in these areas that were disconnected. Of course, in these areas where wood was scarce, it was easier to make bridges out of ropes. And of course, these ropes made out of palm fibers were easier to braid together, rebuild, and if they fell apart, it's easier to bring it back together. So the Quran gives that analogy as the analogy of what the Sabbath for the Muslims is. It's something that you do 5 times a day. You take about 5 minutes each time in specific periods of the day to take time away from the world so that you can self-reflect, reflect on where you are, and it's also a time for you to give yourself the energy, because a lot of times we're so engrossed in the world around us that we forget who we are. We forget our purpose. Sometimes we forget why we're doing something, because we're just doing it for the sake of doing it, that we forget why we're doing it. We forget what purpose it gives us in life. So these timings are in the early morning, so basically at dawn. That's the first time. So where you connect with the Creator. This is here, and as the rabbi said, it's very important in Islam. The central element is the belief in a creator of the universe, a great source behind all creation. So reconnecting with that source of creation and reflecting on what that means in my life. And then I go up on my life. So I begin my day very early. So the Islamic tradition teaches us to start our day early. So you do your prayer, maybe about 5 in the morning. That's the average time. Of course, it just like the rabbi said, it varies based on which part of the world you're in. But you start early, and then you do your work, and then comes a bit afternoon. So after the sun has moved past being mid-noon, basically when you start casting a shadow on the ground, this hails the time of what is known as the afternoon prayer. So we take time off. So this is the time that you take off from your work. You're in the middle of your busiest day. So you take time off to go, you wash up, you reflect, you pray, you connect with your community. And this is usually, historically, Islamically, this was the time where you take about 2 hours off. This is where the concept of the siesta came from, that was passed on to the Spanish when the Muslims were in Andalusia, and then it came even to Mexico, right? And the Central American countries from the Spanish influence that came from the Muslim influence, which was that you're supposed to take these 2 hours after the prayer that are basically placed between 2 prayers. You started off with a prayer, and you take out these 2 hours, which are like our Sabbath, where there's no work. And of course, that was also the hottest time of the day in those countries, where you spend that time with your family, with your friends, and there's no work during that time. And then when the sun starts to descend, it's getting a little cooler, we have another prayer, which reconnects you with the community, and then you can relaunch back into the world. This is where people go back and they can work again, and this continues until the sun begins to set. So when the sun sets, that hails the end of the day. So there's another prayer, and then you reconnect, and then you can socialize, etc. And then there's another prayer at the end. And these prayers are intended to allow the person to reflect, to reconnect, and reassess their purpose and what they're doing in life. Just like our priest said, the same thing in Islam is that you live in this world, but at the same time you have to have a sense of reflection on where you came from, where you're going, and what your purpose in life is. So that would be a summary in a nutshell.
That's our nutshell. Wonderful. Rabbi, if there's one thing that you wish everybody understood about Judaism, what would that be?
I think that the biggest challenge that Jews navigate is related to the diversity of ways in which Jews Jew. Is, I think, part of the challenge. So I remember when I was in university and I would go tell a professor that I needed a day off because it was a Jewish holiday. And they would say, well, why do you need off? Because like Goldstein's coming. Like, why do you, or I'm Jewish and I'm teaching, how come you're taking off that particular day? And that the way in which different Jews Jew is so diverse that it is often challenging to then understand what is expected, what is required, what do we need to do, how do we navigate those things. While at the same time, there's a Yiddish word called frum, which is like very religiously observant, and sometimes places end up going to what I affectionately call the frummest common denominator, which is, so because there's so many diverse opinions, we're just going to do the furthest to the right version because then everyone will be comfortable, without acknowledging that that still might not make everyone comfortable because people are reflective of such a diversity of approaches. So I think if something was most essential about Judaism is acknowledging that diversity, and so the best way to respond, therefore, is not assuming that you know how Jews Jew, but to, when provided the opportunity, to engage in conversation with someone about what it is that they're looking for, how it is that they observe, how it is that they practice, and use an opportunity to open dialogue rather than assuming that there's a particular way in which it should or must be done.
Thank you. And Imam Jabara, what is the one thing? Well, I was going to kind of mix it up, but okay, we'll give you a break. Yuri. Yuri, what is the one thing that you wish everybody understood about Christianity?
It would be similar to what we all talking about. Like, you can summarize Bible in 2 commandments pretty much, and that's what Jesus said: love your God and love your neighbors yourself. It sounds easier than in practice than it's done, but this is the message in Christianity, that you don't need to feel that you're alone in it. By the grace of Jesus Christ, it is possible. The grace of God enables the human person to be better in life. So instead of struggling in life and thinking, oh, if I'm angry, that's okay, I'll just be angry, you can actually do better and become the best human person that you can be, as created in the image and likeness of God. And that's why in Christianity, we have a community of saints, where you're not saved alone, but you're saved together as a community, where believers are helping each other, supporting each other, building each other up. And that's a good message of the Bible.
Thank you. And now that you've had additional time to reflect on the question,
You didn't need it.
what do you wish is the one thing that everybody understood about Islam?
I would say right off the bat, the biggest misconception people have about Islam is similar to what our rabbi friend said here, is that people assume that Islam is a monolith, that all Muslims are exactly the same. In fact, Islam is extremely diverse, and there are the tenets that I summarized at the beginning of my talk are what all the Muslim sects, regardless, that's what they all say, this is what we're trying to do. Now, of course, having a goal and the methodology that you utilize to attain that goal, those are two different things. You can say, well, my goal is to walk from here to the end of the room. Now, you can choose to navigate around the people by ignoring them. You can choose by navigating the room by making friends with all these people and getting to know them, and you're still getting to your goal. You can choose by getting a bulldozer and bulldozing through them and just getting there. You can choose to make friends with some and alienate others. Those are all choices, but you're still getting to the same goal. You see what I'm saying? So what happens is that the most important thing I would like people to know about our faith is that it's extremely diverse. And in the same way that some of the top-ranking Islamic scholars in the past said, if you have 1,000 people, then you have 1,000 ways of getting to God. The goal is the same. Loving your fellows, helping improve the world. The Jews coined this concept later on in the Middle Ages, tikun ulam, right? Building up the world, repairing the world, restoring the world, right? This concept was very central in Islam, which is this is the purpose. And sometimes people might aim for that purpose, but the way that they apply it is different. So I think the most important thing to remember is that just like with any human idea, there will always be many different ways of understanding or interpreting. You can look at the same passage. I'll give you an example. I remember when I was studying, I was 12 years old at the time when this incident happened, and we were looking at one particular saying of the Prophet Muhammad, right? And this was reflected in a very famous exegesis that was done in Andalusia 1,200 years ago, right? And I was fascinated with the fact that this little saying, it was a small line, had 786 different interpretations, different opinions. And that was back then, 1,200 years ago. And they were all, according to my teachers, they're all valid because these are all possible ways of understanding this passage. So this is the most important thing that we have in our faith is that it's okay to have difference of opinions. And it's okay to be different. Actually, to all be the same is problematic because the more monolithic and the more same you are and the more homogeneous, the more problematic the ideas are. So that's the central aspect of Islam. And it's important to remember that even today, there are thousands of Muslim denominations and sects. They don't want to call, maybe they don't like using the words denominations and sects because they say, oh, well, it's something that Christians use or others use, but it's the same thing at the end of the day.
Well, thank you. And I think you've picked up on some universal values that are very close to my own heart, which include diversity and love. And I know my colleagues would agree with that being important to Algonquin College as well. So thank you for that. So I think we'll move the conversation now from how we experience each of these religions to how they impact our day-to-day in the workplace. So I'm wondering, Yuri, if I can start with you, what are some of the most universally practiced events or holidays that might require individuals to have some time away from work or arrange for privacy at work?
So in Christianity, we know the major holidays that we celebrate through the year is Christmas, which we just did. And Lent is starting on February 26th. So we will celebrate here Ash Wednesday. Anyone is welcome to come to the Spiritual Center to celebrate the beginning of Lent. And this is 40 days before celebrating Easter, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And just being mindful that during the Lent, many Christians, this is a time for them to fast. And depending which tradition you're coming from, they take in extra time not to eat animal products and spend more time in meditation and prayer. And so sometimes if you see your fellow worker who might be practicing Christian faith, you might ask how they are doing during this great Lent time.
Thank you. And Rabbi, what university practice events or holidays might require Jews to leave the workplace, recognizing you already said that there are so many diverse
Yes, okay.
ways?
So our calendar is lunar as opposed to solar. So the first thing in relation to our calendar is that our holidays move. And so to be aware that they're not going to happen at the exact same time. And so ours re-regulates itself. In fact, there's a 19-year cycle that was created by rabbis thousands of years ago, so that every 19 years, the whole system reboots. So every 19 years, the Jewish calendar and the secular calendar meet, unless over that window of time is a 100-year. Anyone know why that doesn't happen in that particular example? Hot take. Because every 4 years, there's a leap year on the secular calendar, with the exception of every 100 years where there isn't, so it's one day off if it overlaps with that particular period of time. So if you're like, the high holy days were in early September this year, how come they're in early October next year? That's why. So that's kind of the first thing to be aware of, just the holidays move. So to quickly go through holidays, some which are majorly observed but have limited university implications. So like Hanukkah would be an example of a holiday that is largely observed but has limited implications in terms of availability to participate. But the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, or the New Year for the world, as well as Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, which is they're 10 days apart, happen usually sometime in September, though sometimes early October. That's immediately followed by the holiday of Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, which culminates in Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. So that's an 8 or 9 day celebration that happens over the course of that month. So if you're like, hey, Goldberg, you've been out a lot this month, that's the month. That's going to happen along the way, the month of Tishrei on the Hebrew calendar. So there's the Feast of Booths, as well as Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, as well as the Day of Atonement in that month. The next kind of major observance you're going to encounter where there's implications in terms of work. So there's Purim, which is the story of Esther and Mordechai. That, again, doesn't have any significant implications unless someone has to leave a little early. But Passover is the next one. So Passover is, there are going to be dietary needs in terms of not eating leavened products over that particular time. So matzah, that kind of God's first flatbread, is eaten over that particular time of year, and that's a 7 or 8 day holiday that comes in April, usually every year. And then there's the holiday of Pentecost or Shavuot, which is a 1 or 2 day festival that's usually the end of May, beginning of June, which celebrates the receiving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, and is 7 weeks after Passover in terms of the timing. And there are other fast days that come up along the way and other holidays. When it comes to what is going to be most relevant to the university, I would say that those kind of check most of the boxes. Sasha, tell me, am I forgetting anything in particular that's relevant to the university in that regard?
No, the only thing I would bring up is sometimes, I don't know about Algonquin, but I know Ottawa and Carleton will schedule exams on Shabbat in the past, and that can cause a problem.
Yes, so this was new to me, the idea that exams were not during the same time slots as you had the class, and in fact that they could be on the weekend, like on Saturday. So that's not that's a weekly holiday as in the Sabbath, but certainly thank you, Sasha, for reminding us that if we talked about the importance of Sabbath observance, that could come into play in relation to exams.
Thank you. And what types of workplace accommodation around holidays might we be looking for with Muslims?
Well, our calendar is a little more complicated than the Jewish calendar, even though theirs is more regulated. Ours doesn't have any regulation, so it migrates throughout the entire year. So Ramadan is going to pass through every single day and month of the entire year. So that's the only difference, is that you might have Ramadan in the summer for several years. So it moves 11 days every year. That's the difference. So every year is going to move back 11 days. So that's all you're going to be aware of, right? And then we have 2 major holidays in Islam that are universally accepted by all Muslims. And they are a celebration after the fasting of the month of Ramadan, which is a 30-day fast from dawn until dusk. And then the question is, of course, in areas where there is no dawn and dusk, how do you do that? The Muslims had reached Scandinavia back in the 9th century. They were doing trading with the Nordic people, with the Vikings, right? They found large hordes of Abbasid Islamic coins in those areas because of trade. And what had happened is when these Muslim merchants had gone north, they brought the question back to Baghdad, where the central power was. How do we observe fasting and prayer, etc.? Because the timings that we have are really off. It's completely off. So what they did is they looked at the passages from the Quran, etc., and then they understood that in places where times are out of balance, then you compare the closest place in the world geographically that has a normal time span, and you go based on their timing. So that's what they used to do. So anyways, fasting the month of Ramadan, which could be either 29 or 30 days, because the lunar month could be either 29 or 30 days. At the end of which, we have a celebration, and the celebration is usually for 3 days. And the part that Muslims are required to be part of is the major prayer that is done on the first day. And historically, it was done right after sunrise, which would have been around 7 o'clock in the morning. And it usually lasts about an hour and a half, 2 hours maximum. So in cases where a lot of the mosques in Ottawa try to do it earlier so that people can do their Eid prayer before they go to work. And we also have later prayers that are done as late as 10 or even 11 o'clock, to accommodate people who can't wake up too early and families, etc. But in general, it's usually just the first of these days. But in terms of the holiness, it's 3 days for the one celebration and 4 days for the other. And the next celebration comes after the pilgrimage season, and that comes 2 months and 10 days later. And we have another celebration, and that is for 4 days. So in total, we have 7 days of 7 holy days in the year, which of course reflects symbolically the 7 days of creation of the universe, which are also spoken about in the Quran. So aside from that, these are the only ones. Of course, different sects have different holidays. Among the Sufis, among the mystics, they have their own special holidays. Among the Ja'farites of the Shiite school, they also have many holidays that commemorate saints and their birthdays and deaths and martyrdom, etc. But those are not universally observed.
Can I just throw in one fun fact? Anyone know how you determine the Sabbath in space?
That's a nice one.
So how do you determine when the Sabbath begins and ends if you're in space? So the answer is they do it based on the timing and mission control. So they do Houston, Texas time for the Sabbath in space. So for people who are observing various different holidays like the Sabbath in space, they do it based upon the timing and mission control as opposed to up there, which otherwise every day happens every, I think, 27 minutes. And so you would just be spending literally all day trying to get in 5 services every 27 minutes. It would be a very challenging situation up there. But that's just a little fun fact.
Nice.
Well, you all will have found on your seats multicultural calendars that actually list all of these dates. Probably not the outer space part. That's just for you in the room.
The next expansion, when they're done with the parking lot area there,
Right.
building, they're going to Algonquin in space. It's going to be great.
But you can always refer to that calendar to find out the important holy dates for a whole variety of religions. So please take those with you. Yuri, now we've learned that there's lots of times and dates where people may choose to go away to practice their different religions. Can you tell us how people might do that here specific to our Algonquin College campus? So do we have spaces where people can go? Or?
Yes, so we have an interfaith spiritual center here at Algonquin College. A beautiful center, very unique, and many faiths are welcome to come and practice their traditions, their beliefs. And it's open every day. And students and staff are welcome to come to pray, to meditate. If you check our schedule, Algonquin College Spiritual Center, you can see what type of programming is happening in the spiritual center. But as an example, we have yoga sessions on Mondays and Tuesdays. We have heartfulness meditation run by a Hindu group. We have Muslim prayers happening every day, Christian prayers. We have Bible studies, free lunches. We have a net group. And again, events are for both students and staff. So we do hope to see staff come as well and join us and learn more about the spiritual center.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, here at Algonquin College, we all know we plan lots of celebrations, events that involve food, refreshments. Rabbi, can you give us any guidance on food and refreshments that we should be conscious of when planning to make sure that we're inclusive of people who practice the Jewish faith?
Okay, so again, with the caveat that there are so many different ways that no matter how you're doing it, it's wrong. It's like whenever I go to the dentist, it's like however you're brushing, it's wrong. The idea that there are certain core tenets, which is the separation of milk and meat is one core tenet, and then the not eating of shellfish and pig products are another one, just in terms of the main foods are either eaten or not eaten together. The thing to be mindful of if you really want to be attentive to this particular thing is that products that are kosher actually have a symbol on the product letting you know that it's kosher. And so the most prominent example is COR, C-O-R, on the product. And so if you're looking to make sure that the products that you're purchasing are kosher, is to look for some symbol on there. The other ones that you might encounter is a U with an O around it, which is the Orthodox Union. And there are a couple of other symbols that exist. The circle and an R does not count. That just means registered trademark. But there are certain symbols, and so I know that I personally would be happy to be helpful, as well as our friends at Hill Ottawa. I'm going to throw them in the pool as well. That if there's ever a question about is this a problem, is this not a problem, to please feel free to ask, but to just primarily look on the products that you're purchasing. Fresh fruits and vegetables are fresh fruits and vegetables, and things like that. But things that are packaged, to look for those symbols on it.
Thank you. And Mohammed Jabara, are there any foods or other dietary restrictions we should be conscious of for people practicing
Islam is very similar to the Jewish dietary code. So we don't eat amphibians, we don't eat lizards, we don't eat insects. Obviously, pork is a big one. And the animals in general, we can eat anything from the sea. So so we don't have the prohibition against shellfish. And with the exception of some where there is actually one school in the Muslim tradition, the Hanafites among them are those who say, shellfish are also forbidden. But in general, the Muslim tradition, there's no prohibition of anything comes from the sea. So if you're using seafood, you're generally fine. And of course, alcohol. So any alcoholic products. And of course, pork is pig products, right? So sometimes people think that pork is not the product of a pig, or lard. So anything that comes from a pig, including gelatin, even if it's processed and it changes chemically, it's still not permissible.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question to you regarding alcohol. I know the one I get asked is, well, what if it's a wine sauce and it's cooked for 2 hours and there's no alcohol left? Would that be permitted?
If it's cooked in a way where there's no alcohol left chemically, then it is permissible, because wine, when it changes into vinegar, is permissible to consume because it's no longer wine. So wine vinegar is permissible. And this is something that was discussed by Islamic scholars from the very beginning, so it was not an issue. So as long as, because what's forbidden is not wine or beer, or it's not the drink itself, it is the intoxicating element. So it's the intoxicating element that is forbidden, which also takes us on to the next stage, which is that things like marijuana or cannabis or any types of drugs are also forbidden. So if those are included in the foods, for whatever reason, we cannot consume them. Because sometimes people put them in for ceremonial reasons, or maybe for, but like anything that is mind altering, we are not allowed to consume.
And in Judaism, marijuana needs to be certified kosher if you're eating it, but not if you're smoking it.
And Yuri, is there any food that are, restricted when we look through the Christian lens?
Generally, there are no restrictions, but just being mindful during the Lent period. And there's 4 times a year that many Christian traditions are fasting. So this is the time when, in some more strict tradition, animal products are not used completely during that period. So just be mindful of that.
Thank you. So I'm going to get into a little bit of a spicier question, but I think
We're ready.
we can
We're ready
handle
now.
it.
It's
You're
a safe
ready? We've
space.
warmed up. We're warmed up. Okay. So I'll just put this one out there and see who would like to respond. Is it okay to wish your colleague Merry Christmas, even if we don't know what religion they practice, if any? And so really that question is about, how do we recognize and celebrate our own traditions while respecting other people? Can I wish people Merry Christmas?
Yeah, we just start with that?
You can start.
Okay, sure. In Egypt, around the 10th century, there was a very famous manuscript that was written. It was called An-Nawruziyya. So you're like, what is that? You guys have heard of the concept of Nowruz? Nowruz is the Persian New Year, right? So of course, though it's called Nowruziyya, it wasn't about Nowruz only. It was about all non-Muslim holidays. So the question was arising because, it was part of the Islamic tradition at this time. It was very common, like in Egypt with the Muslims and the Copts and the Orthodox, etc., and wherever you go, and Muslims and the Jews, they were celebrating each other's holidays. So at Shabbat, Muslims would be invited into Jewish homes. On Eid, Jews would be invited into Muslim homes. At Christmas, Muslims would be invited for Christmas dinner. They would be invited to attend services, and people were, you had Christians and Jews in mosques at our holidays. We were there in their holidays. So by the 10th century, of course, this is as Islam began. Because when Islam first was founded, just like with any religion, it was not a formalized, institutionalized religion. Moses didn't come and say, well, this is, like, we're going to have Orthodox and we're going to have Hasidim and we're going to have Reform. He didn't say this stuff. And Christ didn't come and say, well, we're going to have the Orthodox and the, this. He didn't form, they didn't form, these are formed with time. Of course, based on experiences, culture, politics, circumstances. So as these things began to change, people began to question, because it wasn't a question before, because it was normal. People began to question, is it permissible for me as a Muslim to walk into a church that's sitting there celebrating the Eucharist or celebrating something that's obviously not part of my faith? So is it okay for me to be with them? Is it okay for me to wish them a Merry Christmas? Because everybody's doing it, but is it permissible religiously? Am I doing something blasphemous? Am I doing something offensive? I'm sitting with them on the same table, eating a meal that's celebrating their faith. So the scholars in Egypt began to compile these concepts. They said, okay, well, we're going to clarify it to the population. So they put this great manuscript, An-Nawruziyya, which was actually still in manuscript form until about 2014 when it was finally published as a book. It was really hard to get a copy of it, but it was really 2 volumes, very well done. But it basically lists all the events of Muslim and non-Muslim cooperation when it comes to holidays, starting with the Nowruz, starting with the Prophet Muhammad in the city of Medina, being invited by his neighbor who was a Zoroastrian, who invited him for Nowruz. So that's the beginning. So he invited for Nowruz dinner. He says, okay, we have Nowruz, we're celebrating, this is our holiday, it's part of our religion and part of our tradition. And he says, okay, I'll come, but on one condition, that my family come with me. I'm not gonna go without my family. So he's like, okay, fine, you can bring your family, they can come. So he goes with his family, he eats with them, etc. And then he asks him, so what's Nowruz about? He says, well, Nowruz is about people coming together, sharing food. He says, well, if that's Nowruz, then we should do Nowruz every day, right? So that's the beginning of the discussion. So it goes into all these examples from Egypt, from Syria, from North Africa, Spain, etc., of Muslim, non-Muslim cooperation when it comes to holidays. So religiously, there was no issue. Of course, with the rise of more fundamentalist and puritanical sects of Islam in the last 200 years, they rekindled this question, saying, no, it's blasphemy, etc. So the Muslim community, the Muslim world started going through this confusion, like, are we allowed, are we not? So that's the current debate that's going on. But for most of our history, it was very common. So long story short, there's no objection from mainstream Islam to Muslims and non-Muslims respecting and celebrating each other's holidays.
Okay. I don't care what you call it, I care what you mean. So if you call something a holiday concert, but it's singing Christmas songs, like just call it a Christmas concert. Like don't call it a holiday concert to be politically correct, but not actually represent the values therein. When you say happy holidays at the end of December, but my holiday was like 3.5 weeks ago, like we're not talking about my holiday was already 3 weeks ago. Like we're talking about Christmas, so like call it Christmas. So I think that for me is at the heart of this particular question, where I think that there's a value in acknowledging the diversity of observances that happen during that time of year. The idea, especially in a pre-electricity world, of the days starting to get longer again was very exciting for people, which is why you have all these holidays that have to do with light that all have to do at the same time of year, because the days are starting to get longer again. So there is this sense of shared connection in that particular regard. But if you want to have a holiday observance rather than a Christmas observance, think about those diversity of practices and how to incorporate them in meaningful ways into what it is that's happening. But if it's about Christmas or it's on Christmas, like just say Merry Christmas, call it a Christmas party, and be straightforward about what you mean.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Well
Yes.
said. Yes, definitely.
Wonderful. Seems like we have consensus on this one. So moving into a little bit more of concerning our serious topic, we really want to delve into how do we create a culture of religious inclusion here at Algonquin College. But if we, read the media, look at the numbers, we know that there's a rise in hate speech, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism across the country and on campus. So if anybody has not, is concerned or doesn't see that happening, I just have a little bit of statistics here. So in May 2019, Ipsos published a public opinion poll which found that 1 in 4 Canadians responded that over the past 5 years, it has become more acceptable to be prejudiced against Muslims. And if we look at some of the numbers related to the Jewish community, we know that they're some of the most targeted communities. In 2018, there were over 2,000 incidents of anti-Semitism reported. So this is real. This is not, a theoretical concept or something that's only happening in the United States. This is real in Canada as well. So Yuri, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit with us about how we can respect the face of others, but at the same time respond when we see or hear acts of hate, anti-Semitism, or Islamophobia.
Well, all religions teach us to respect others. Doesn't matter of what faith, even if the person doesn't have a faith, we are to respect them and treat them with love and respect. And here in the spiritual center, we strive to create the programs that are inclusive, welcoming, that are respecting of others. And this is a beautiful place here in the college where we are learning, not just with our students who come from all over the world, and they learning how to treat others with respect, but also for us staff to learn how we can respect each other, how we can learn about other traditions and faith. On the other hand, it's important for us to know the policies that are in place here in the college, employee code of conduct, the respectful workplace. So be aware and know your rules, regulations, and know what to do when something like that would happen, how to report it, who to talk to. And obviously it's not accepted or tolerated here at the college.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody sees or hears anything, they're strongly encouraged to report it to security services, or if you're not sure if that's, was that something that was hateful or not, you can always call and they will guide and advise you around that. So don't hesitate to report, would be my suggestion.
Couple of quick thoughts. One is, yesterday was Martin Luther King Day in the States, and one of my favorite quotes of his was, darkness cannot defeat darkness, only light can do that. Hatred cannot defeat hatred, only love can do that. And so when we think about how do we respond to hate, doing so with love, I think, is the only way in which to accomplish that particular objective. And as was shared as a core tenet of all of our faith traditions and of our broader community, I think that's at the center of these sorts of things. I also think that university and college campuses are really an essential place for conversation, where people get exposed to other approaches and ideologies, often for the very first time. And so these are the places in which the best versions of these sorts of conversations can and should take place. And how do we assure that we create an environment that doesn't preclude the opportunity for those conversations, that dialogue, to understand the ways that not only that we're the same, but the ways in which we're different, and being able to acknowledge and ideally celebrate the ways that we're different as a core component of what university life is all about. And I think that for me, I often, when I counsel people in general, I talk about me first language, which is saying, when I heard what you said, this is how it made me feel, rather than this is what you did. Like, rather than saying you just said hate speech, oftentimes that is not going to be very well received by that individual, nor are they going to internalize it. Mm-hmm. But if there's someone in that environment that says, when you said that, this is how it made me feel and why, there's no argument there. This is how I experienced it, and therefore I want you to hear how I experienced what it was that you just said, and let's talk about that. To me, is often the most effective way to engage in a substantive form of dialogue, which is not about saying, this is what you did, this is what you said, because they'll immediately get on the defensive. It's like a fight or flight kind of situation. But to make sure that our arms and hearts are open to that person, and to provide an opportunity for meaningful dialogue and conversation.
Well said.
Would you like to add anything about how we might prevent or respond to hate speech on campus?
I would say you should have sessions like this, not just for the staff. I'm sure most of these people already know what we're telling them. We should have sessions like this for the students, so that they can have an opportunity to see, a priest, a rabbi, sitting together, discussing, and then they have the option to listen and hear, and also pose their questions and their concerns. That's the best, and I agree, definitely. There's no alternative to combating darkness except with light. So when it's dark, you have to turn on flick on the switch, or you need to bring light, and light is symbolic of knowledge. as human beings, we naturally fear things that we don't understand, right? Thus the Muppets.
Like the puppets?
The Muppets, yes.
Like Miss Piggy?
Yes. Do you know the purpose of the Muppets? When they were first created, their purpose was to demystify monsters for children who feared them. Because children were afraid of, oh, there's a monster under the bed, there's a monster in the corner, in the closet, in the darkness. Every time the parents turn off the light, the child gets scared because they're monsters. So these monsters, because they're all monsters. Elmo's a monster. Elmo, monster, right? He's not a cute little furry, he's a monster. Cookie, monster. They're
That's who I
monsters.
blame when there are cookies missing at the house.
Yes.
If there's a cookie
So,
monster in the house.
When the children see these scary beings that, I mean, if you look at them without them speaking for the first time, you don't know what they are, they look scary. Because they're like this mysterious, scary looking thing. But then it's speaking to you in a very polite manner, it's teaching you manners, they're actually nice creatures. So monsters are not as, I mean, that's what we've done in our modern culture. Dracula and ghosts and vampires and all these things are all of a sudden pop culture beautiful things. Back in the 30s when Bela Lugosi became Dracula, it was the scariest thing ever. Now Dracula's, the little kids love Dracula and they're gonna dress up as Dracula. So the point is that when things are scary and mystified and terrify us, we need to embrace them. We need to understand them. That's the only way we're going to overcome it. You're not going to overcome hate by further pushing people away and penalizing them. It doesn't work. You're just going to push them underground or behind the scenes. They're going to continue.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all those insights and thoughts today. I've had the privilege of asking questions so far, but I want to open this up to the group and to Perth and Pembroke. So if anyone has any questions, I think, Chris, you were going to run the mic, just because we ask that you do speak into the mic so that our colleagues can hear you. Just going to check to see if we got anything from Perth or Pembroke here.
Is this working? Hi, everyone. My name is Sasha Catherine. I work with Hillel Ottawa, so that's the Jewish university students or Jewish students on campus. So my question is kind of a follow-up to the question that we just had. I have a lot of students that come to me and they are unsure what to do when their prof, they say, is abusing the podium or putting their beliefs of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, all that on the students. It makes them feel uncomfortable and they're scared to approach the professor and say, you know, that article you just gave is very anti-Semitic. They think it will cause tension and in the end, the prof could also lower their grades because of it. So obviously, I would suggest going to student services, but they argue who's going to believe me over the professor. So my question to you and also the professors here is, what do you suggest in that kind of situation?
I'll chime in a little bit, where, you know, we talked a moment ago about the campus being a place for dialogue and conversation and engagement, and do we, you know, assume nefarious intent, or do we assume that it's out of ignorance, or do we assume, like, we don't know where the place of this individual is coming from. And so whether the student themselves feels comfortable, but again, I understand that if they don't feel comfortable, again, using the me first language, saying, rather than saying what you gave us is anti-Semitic, which is when you shared this is how it made me feel as a Jewish person. This is how it made me feel as a Muslim when I heard the thing that you said. Being able to share that hopefully is something that is possible and encouraged within the campus environment. The other piece is that whether there's an avenue utilizing other professionals, you know, like a campus chaplain who they could reach out to, who is more on a like similar power level dynamic to be able to engage in conversation with that person. This is what I encountered. This is how they experienced it. I can understand how they would experience it this way. Can we talk about that sort of thing? Is also another opportunity where people like us could potentially be helpful in facilitating dialogue in those environments beyond the formal kind of student services approach that you talked about.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. So this was something that just came into my head while I was sitting here. When you were speaking about the restriction on alcohol or substances that are mind-altering, what I wondered is, how does that impact people with mental health that might require medications that might be considered mind-altering? So I just wondered.
Well, in Islam, we have this law that our Prophet Muhammad said. He said, and of course it's based on the necessities. We say, الضرورات تبيح المحظورات, which is that necessities make things that are impermissible permissible. So if you're on a deserted island and all you have there are pigs wandering around, you don't have a choice, you have to eat it, because in Islam says you cannot allow yourself to die. So if you don't eat, then it's a problem. For example, you're supposed to fast in Ramadan, but if fasting is going to make your health deteriorate, you are forbidden from fasting. Like it's strictly forbidden. You have to not fast. So there's no issue when it comes to if alcohol is the only solution that the medicine is going to be dissolved in to be taken in, then definitely. I mean, the word alcohol comes from the Arabic, right? That comes to us in English from the Arabic, because the Muslims were among the first to distill alcohol and to use it for medical purposes. So the difference here, we're talking about things that, like wine or sherry or beer that you're serving at a function. It's not the same as medication, because we do have medicines that do have alcohol, or that sometimes there are pills that are only made with gelatin, and there's no alternative, and you need to take it because you need it for your health. So we make exceptions for those things.
Yeah. And Judaism has the same idea. It's called pikuach nefesh in Hebrew, which is if it's for saving a life, then you have the obligation to do that thing. So whether it's in relation to gel caps with gelatin, or whether it's in relation to having to eat on a fast day and things like that.
Yes.
If it's called in Hebrew safek pikuach nefesh, even if there's a small chance that it could possibly be an ill health effect, you're supposed to do the thing, because that's at the forefront of our minds.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today. It's been very interesting listening to all three of you. I could completely believe everything that all three of you said and see myself in all of the different faiths, which is interesting for me. I have a question, though. We have three faith leaders who are all male. I'll be interested in your perspective on females in your congregations and in your faith.
That's a great question. That's the ongoing debate. In Islam, the thing that's strange about the Muslim tradition is we're the opposite of the Jewish and Christian tradition. Like, see, in the past, they were less open, right? And more strict. We were the opposite. We were very open, and now we're becoming strict. See, I'll give you an example. 1,000 years ago, it was very common for a woman to be an imam in a mosque. Actually, 40% of Islam's top-ranking major scholars in the past were women. All of Islam's top-ranking male scholars studied under women. For example, you have Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, major Shafi'ite scholar, was originally from Asqalan, which is where near Gaza is today, right? And he personally studied under 84 major Islamic female scholars. He says, I studied at the feet of 84 major Islamic female scholars, and he names them and their attributes. And another great scholar was a great mufti of the Hanafite school. He said he studied under 400 major female Islamic scholars. And you have depictions from the Middle Ages, from the time of the Crusades, where they have pictures of a woman teaching men and that was depicting what they had seen in the Muslim world. It was very common. The Mufti, you have Bibi of Samarqandiyya. She was the Mufti of Samarkand. You probably never heard of her. Not only was she the Mufti of Samarkand, she was the mentor of Salahuddin. You guys call him Saladin. You guys remember Saladin, the guy of the Crusades? He was taught by this major female figure from Samarkand, which is in, like we're talking about Uzbekistan, like right there, right? Herat, Kabul, Afghanistan, they had female muftis. So mufti is equivalent to an archbishop in the Christian faith. So you're talking about one of the highest positions you can have were attained by women. The mufti of Damascus was a woman. The highest ranking official to hold the position of a Qadi al-Quda, which is the supreme justice of the Muslim empire, was taken by a woman. Her name was Thamel during the Abbasid period. So this is 1,300 years ago almost. And she was not only a woman, she was a former slave, and she was African. So she was black, a woman, and a former slave. And she was assigned the position of Qadi al-Quda. Her name was Thamel, extremely famous. Until today, like we have maybe one or two supreme justices. We're talking about 1,000 years ago, over 1,000 years ago. So it wasn't uncommon in the Muslim world for women to be in positions of religious leadership, and it was very acceptable and was accepted. The oldest university in the world, Al-Qarawiyya University, was founded by a woman, Fatima ibn Muhammad. So this was very well known. So women had established universities, had established institutions. Actually, over 33% of the universities in the Muslim world and libraries were established by women in the past. So what happens is, after the Mongol conquest of Baghdad and the Muslim world is destroyed, so most of our old heritage, sometimes people say, well, we don't have any records of old Islamic manuscripts, Qur'ans. Well, come on, like between the Inquisition in Spain and with the Mongols burnt, we lost over 10 million manuscripts. 10 million. 10 million is not a joke. That's more than most universities in the Western world can put together. It's not I'm talking about these were handwritten. They were some of the best. So, and Baghdad alone lost over 5 million that were burnt, in massive piles and thrown into the Tigris River until it became red from the ink and black from the ink. It was discolored. So this knowledge was lost. The first thing they did, of course, they came in, they killed all the scholars. That was the biggest thing. So after that, began a period where people were trying to hold on to something. And of course, when you're trying to live, you're not really as concerned with education. So we see a decline in Muslim women in positions of, and of course, there's a predominance of ignorance starts to go on the rise, and then the old systems start to reverse. So we have, women are used as a scapegoat. So people start to say, well, the reason we were overthrown was because we had all these women everywhere, so God cursed us with the Mongols and in the, etc. and the Crusaders. Their punishment because we empowered women. So let us not. And if we don't, then maybe God will be in our favor again. So this is part of what starts to happen. So by the 17th century, the number of Muslim women in positions of scholarship, you start to count them on your fingers. Whereas they outnumbered men until the time of the Crusades. Actually, towards the end of the Crusades, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Ibn Kathir al-Dimashqi, he's the guys in Damascus, and he's documenting how the men in Damascus are complaining about how women in educational institutions outnumber them and are intimidating them because they're so outspoken. The men feel like they're pushed to the side. They don't have the same equal opportunity for education. So the men are complaining about not having equal access to education because women are dominating the education system. And these are clearly recorded. We have so many documents about it. They talk about it. So what happens going from there, from where Kabul in Afghanistan and Herat in Afghanistan, their top religious scholars are women, to where women are forbidden from even going to elementary school. Crazy. Like the Prophet Muhammad said very simply, to educate a man is to educate an individual, but to educate a woman is to educate a nation. So in the past, the women, having women in these positions was prominent. And as you can see today, if you ask your local Muslim, can a woman be an imam? They're like, absolutely not.
I'm hoping either of you can share a more optimistic story for women.
A couple of quick things. One is we're all products of the places in which we live. And so in the same way that Islam was just to remind us, particularly progressive in the Middle Ages, they're the ones who translated Greek philosophy into Arabic when it was being forbidden by the church and things like that, that we're all products of our age. And so it's not an accident that women began becoming clergy in Judaism when women were gaining equal rights and equal opportunity within the broader North American society. And so we forget that I'm always moved when I'm up on the Hill and I see the statue related to women's suffrage, and the acknowledgement is that women are people. Like the idea that it was only through that declaration that women were determined to be people, and the fact that's only about 100 years ago is a terrifying and terrible acknowledgement. And so we're all products of our world, we're products of our place. Two things that I find just personally in terms of this area. Number one is I make an effort not to appear in conversations that don't include female voices. And since Sarah was the organizer, I felt like comfortable.
I count. I count, I hope.
Yeah, so you're a person.
Thank you, under the law.
But if I'm asked to be part of a panel without female participation, I generally try to bow out because I have a colleague that's a woman, and so I will send her in my place as a way to make sure that there are female voices included in the conversation. The other thing that I find powerful is in the 1980s in my particular denomination in Judaism, where women were able to become rabbis for the first time, and ignoring the fact that when women start doing things, men stop doing them because men are the worst. That there's a trend that men will then devalue things once women start doing it and stop doing those jobs within our society. But they then became part of certain Jewish conversations in Jewish law. And the very first paper written by a female rabbi in our denomination was how do we look at the areas of miscarriage, stillbirth, abortion in relation to a sense of loss, and how do we as Jews navigate that particular question? Because up to that point in time, the idea was that if the child is not born alive, there is no mourning ritual, because the idea is that it was never alive, and therefore there is no formal mourning rituals involved, which was, I think, a man's way to try to express a sense of understanding and not wanting to add additional suffering to the experience. But once a woman is writing that paper saying, too bad, the loss happened, I'm feeling the loss. Whether something is formally observed or not, there is a very real sense of loss in these particular moments. And I need rituals. I need a way to have my Judaism speak to these things that are occurring in my life. And it was only because women's voices began to be included in that conversation that we're able to be attuned and understand that reality as part of Jewish law and Jewish life. And so that's one of countless ways that women's voices have bettered what Judaism is able to say, in the same way that having LGBTQ plus individuals as rabbis has also enriched our understanding of Judaism and Jewish life and our understanding therein. There are some interesting questions related to trans Jews and different Jewish legal categories. Is Judaism gendered, or is it bodied, or is it neither? And those sorts of questions that we don't address unless their voices are being included in the conversation. And so I think in that regard, women's voices, as well as all those others, have enriched Judaism in more ways than I can appropriately express.
And Yuri, did you want to tackle that?
Yes. There has been a shift within Christianity, and today we do have, in many different denominations, women in leadership positions, including being ordained as bishops, being pastors of churches. As a matter of fact, even within our interdenominational campus ministry here at the college, we do have a number of female pastors who do come to the college to serve the community. So again, depends of which tradition you're coming from. If it's more strict Orthodox or Catholic tradition, probably not. But then there's many Protestant traditions within the Christianity who are acknowledging that and letting women to lead the way. So there's good news.
And I'm sure we could come up with many more questions because this conversation has been absolutely fascinating, and I think we've just touched the very surface of this, but time has got the better of us. Yes. So we're going to have to wrap up. So again, thank you so much to all of you for all your insights on behalf of Algonquin College. We were so pleased to host you today, and I hope this is the first of many conversations. So to you, you will have found on your chair a little slip of paper where you can give us some feedback on how the audience felt that today went, and let us know if we should be having more conversations with other leaders of some of the other faiths we know are here in Canada. So if you want to take that paper, fill it out. I'm going to put a box here behind me. You can just drop it in, completely anonymous. So thank you again, and that'll be the end of our panel today.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, great pleasure, yes.